I kin Deku from My Hero Academia, and I think that's why I don't find this ending to be a bad ending. This is not going to be one of those 1-minute discourse videos where we objectively figure out if the ending to My Hero Academia is good or bad. This is more so a personal vlog with a lot of RJ lore and some nuance. First of all, when I say kin, I don't mean he's my everything. I try to be him, I obsess over him, like, hi, I'm Izuku Midoriya, and I'm here to save you. But I do mean I share a lot of qualities with him, and I do see my struggles in him. I have like a kin triangle of Izuku, Nanami, and Zenitsu. Starting with Nanami, I was always told that I was really mature for my age, which is not necessarily a good thing. I'm often told that I'm the dad of the group, which, you know, sometimes we might need to unpack that. And up until a couple of years ago, even though I'm often the friend who gives emotional labor and support, I still was just very muted with my emotions and expressing them, and very stoic. But thanks to therapy and a lot of internal work, I'm not as much like that anymore because I'm not an anime character, I am not stagnant. I also heavily related to working the terrible 9-to-5 customer service type jobs, and then going straight to Taekwondo practice afterwards, in the same way that Nanami was both a salesman and a jujutsu sorcerer. I barely remember the movie, but I do remember that scene from Creed where he was basically going from his regular job to boxing training. Like, that was actually me. I would come into work bruised and injured. And this parallel only increased as I started to wear suits for my cosplays. But kind of against my will, I ended up being an example for a bunch of younger martial artists. I've done martial arts for a good chunk of my life, and a good chunk of it was after I graduated from high school, and I did it from like 2011 until 2020-ish. 2011 through 2016 I fought for my university, and then after that I trained at a regular Taekwondo school. And at that regular Taekwondo school I was often the most experienced when it came to fighting, and I was the oldest, so I was an example. But I actually did care about those kids and be an example. Even if I didn't want to be, I still cared. Zenitsu, I don't kin him for the inappropriate reasons, but for his anxiety and then the duality of just locking in. I legit suffer from anxiety. I'm a very anxious person, but I also sometimes just like am the total opposite, and I will do things that the average person is afraid to do. And sometimes even what the courageous person is afraid to do. Like legit, sometimes people will categorize me as scary for how much I just lock in and get things done regardless. Ironically, I probably have more fears than the average person, but I just constantly overcome my fears. I know that I don't look like it or sound like it, and most people think that I'm lying and don't believe me until they actually see me fight or take a hit from me, but some of my teammates would actually be afraid to spar me. Like that sweet, quiet RJ who doesn't want to hurt anyone will accidentally break your nose. That's actually happened twice. So on to young Midoriya. My Hero Academia aired about 2 years after I graduated from college, so that was when I was training at that new school, which was a new and valuable experience for me. Again, I was no longer at a university competing with a team of people who were my age and having similar lifestyles, but in a more family-oriented setting. I related to Deku's anxiety, his desire to spread kindness. Despite me being a martial artist, I was really resistant to unnecessary fighting. I often shouldered too much burden and was still a bit of a people pleaser. Not good, and that's something that's been worked on since the past 8 years, or however many years that is. I'm a note taker. I obsess over details if you can't tell by my content. However, I think his physical journey was the most relatable thing for me. So like I said, I've done martial arts for about 15 years of my life. I stopped training about 2 or 3 years ago, and that's how I've incorporated a lot of physicality into my cosplay. Now, I'm an ex-athlete, a washed up athlete if you will. When I trained Taekwondo in college, I hadn't had really good formal martial arts training since I was 9 and got my black belt. And the martial arts I had studied prior was mainly self-defense. So when I got to college and was out of shape and out of practice, and they mainly did sparring, I was in a whole new world. I lacked technique, and at the time it was mostly just me and upperclassmen who were all black belts who had been sparring for years prior. I remember before the school year started, I was trying to get back into shape, so I was doing like my push-ups and my sit-ups and squats and whatever. So even though I wasn't very good at Taekwondo, I at least had some sort of fitness going. And for me, that really felt like Deku getting into shape just to show up to testing, to just be kind of lackluster. He didn't really have a quirk that he could use properly. In the same way that Deku struggled to use his quirk and compete while all of his classmates had used their quirks for their entire lives, I was awkward and clunky while the rest of my teammates had been training pretty consistently. Training was going pretty well into my first competition where suddenly I couldn't breathe. I stopped moving and my opponent was just wailing on me. The funniest thing, however, was that while my body was shutting down and I couldn't breathe, I was still just like hunched over blocking his shots. Like, yeah, my body is giving out, but my brain is still kind of there. And I was like suffering. Like there's even the point where I was hunched over and he goes over to kick me thinking that he can get me, and I just kick him in the head. And to me, this kind of mirrored when Deku uses one for all and his body gets injured in the process. And the thing is, during my fighting career, I lost most of my fights not because I was a bad martial artist, but because I was actually suffocating every single fight. It was kind of my thing. And by losing, I mean typically by points. I was pretty good at blocking. I never had a concussion. I was rarely ever scared or felt like I could not actually defend myself. Trust me, just trust me. While there's a lot of overlap, there can be a very big difference between competition and self-defense. Not to brag, but sometimes the opponents who still beat me in the competition walked away more injured than me. And in case you've never experienced it before, fighting is extremely exhausting, even to an in-shape person. So why was I suffocating? Well, I never fully got answers because of the healthcare system. Well, let's just leave it at that. But luckily, since I went to school for physiology, worked with athletic trainers and physical therapists, and did a little athletic training course, I was able to piece together some ideas. And I'm not going to go over all of my diagnoses, but I think it's about 3 things working at once. So really, it was up to me to figure things out because nobody knew me like me. And unfortunately, again, because of the American healthcare system, I couldn't get the resources to figure out what exactly was going on officially and get help. Because even if I pretty much know what's going on, I don't have the authority to actually get help for it because I'm not a medical professional. So in case you're wondering, I hated the feeling of sparring or just exhausting myself. Suffocating sucks. Legitimately, I didn't know that when you're running, you're not supposed to suffocate. And for me, when I was running like a mile or something, it was like, how much do I feel like enduring the idea of suffocating? For the record, the feeling of suffocating is terrible. Like after fighting, I would be on the ground, huffing, puffing, coughing, wheezing. It was actually bad. This would sometimes occur during sparring in class or during hard workouts, but most of the time it happened when I was at competitions because you're going all out. There's nerves, your health is on the line, you're fighting someone non-stop. So that kind of intensity is really hard to mimic when you're not just actually doing it. But despite hating that feeling every single time, I was also a martial artist and I love martial arts. So I kept going. And my goal was to improve the stats that I could improve. I might never have the regular cardiovascular endurance of the average person, but I can still be harder, better, faster, and stronger. Despite having long legs and people saying that I was built for Taekwondo, I had a lot of things going on that said otherwise. A history of injuries, joint issues, an overactive nervous system, anxiety, a high fear of failure. But these days people wonder like why I'm so fit, and that's because it's a remnant of all the things I put myself through to overcome my own version of One for All. My breathing issues, my joint issues, etc. I think I started off as a freshman at like 135 pounds. I benched maybe like 135. My mile was like 9 minutes. And in about like a year and a half, 2 years, I was benching like 220. I was running a 6-minute mile. I weighed like 150 or so. I was squatting like 3 plates for reps. And while that wasn't the most dramatic gym transformation, it was a big transformation for me, especially because that wasn't necessary. That wasn't necessarily part of Taekwondo. I ran outside of class because I wanted to. I lifted outside of class because I wanted to. I trained my flexibility, kicking, and everything outside the class because I wanted to be better. I wanted to be stronger. I was always a skinny person, but I remember coming back one summer and people were like, whoa, you got muscles now. And I was like, yeah, I do. And for like a whole like 3-4 years, every time I met someone from my past from high school, they were like, Rodney, is that you? I'm like, yeah, it's me. Still the same awkward person, just have some muscles. But contrary to this new body that I had developed, I still have my issues. Occasionally, I was the hardest kicker in the room, but at the same time, my hip didn't straighten all the way. I had hip pain. I might be able to throw a nice axe kick, but I had trouble rotating my hips over to do a really proper roundhouse kick. I pretty much low-key developed my own technique for everything I did in martial arts to fit my body. I ended up becoming vice president and president for a couple of years and then stepped down for mental health and just became a regular team member, but still a leader without the roles of all the other stuff. So I was very involved. I was constantly pushing my body that way my 5%, my 10%, my 20%. Was enough to cause damage, was enough to win, was enough to become a good competitor. I felt like the average person trained to be good and I trained to be great, knowing that my issues would always bring me down some. One day my coach, who was a former friend and teammate of mine, sat me down to talk about my fighting. He basically said something like, you can move faster than the fastest people on this team. And I was like, I can? And he's like, you can. You can also hit as hard as some of the strongest people here. But your body will never be able to maintain that. You can't fight like them. So instead of trying to fight with them kick for kick and fighting their style, you need to fight your own style and learn to be strategic. Learn to be smart and conserve your energy. Again, who does that sound like? Deku! So after all this time of me trying to get faster, stronger, better technique, I had to learn how to control the ring, how to pace myself, how to make the opponent move for me, learning how to dodge some instead of just taking hits and blocking all the time. So things are great. I had a really good college experience. Every now and then I won. Martial arts changed my life. After college, I took a year off from Taekwondo, and then once I transitioned to the new school, I had like a kinesthetic boom. So often martial artists and dancers have like a kinesthetic awareness. They're very aware of their body, and they could pick up new physical skills a lot more easier than the average person. I think it took me a lot longer than the average person to get there, but when I got there, it really clicked. It was a combination of going to school for physiology and becoming analytical, a combination of years of martial arts, and then working in physical therapy forced me to analyze the human body and learn new skills every single day. So when I take all those new experiences and go to a new school and just have a fresh perspective, suddenly I'm learning techniques that took me years in like minutes. I'm able to teach myself moves that I've never done before without any help. I'm throwing kicks that scared me, and my fighting style is totally changing. This is also why people compliment my acting and my posing for my cosplays, because it's just, I have this kinesthetic awareness now that really helps me out. So despite being a college graduate and a full-grown adult, most of my friends had just retired or quit from Taekwondo at that point, I was at my peak again. I had peaked my peak, and I was getting ready for 3 back-to-back competitions, which I had never done before. It was the biggest month of my whole Taekwondo career, and then COVID became a pandemic. Competition's cancelled, the world goes into isolation, you know the story. Life changes. And for various reasons, mainly avoiding COVID, I didn't go back to Taekwondo for like a year or so. And even when I tried to go back, there was just a lot going on. COVID, old injuries, working, picking up my content creation and cosplay, time commitments, anxiety, life. I also have chronic back pain and hip issues to the point where some days I can't even walk. So despite what people see me do and the things that I show on camera, sometimes I do have a lot more limitations than the average person. And I think that long break between COVID and going back to the new normal really changed my perspective about things. I start to care more about like, what if I do get a concussion one day? Do I really want to deal with that? Do I want to keep accumulating injuries? As much as I really love this sport and fighting and being on top of my physical game, I am kind of sick of being injured all the time. I don't think a lot of people realize like 10 years of being constantly injured is not necessarily, it's fun, but at the same time, it's really not. So I fizzled out and I stopped going to practice, and now I use those athletic skills that are kind of dwindling away, like the flame of all for one, to make content, to make anime content, to make nerdy content. Deku lost his quirk and now he's a teacher. And in real life, I've seen the critiques, people think he's worthless, it was a waste of time, he's a loser, all for nothing. And there's probably even people in his own universe that think the same thing. Despite the fact that his journey was valid and he's affecting the future generations. Obviously, I'm not a fictional hero, but the sad ending where all of his efforts were wasted was relatable. It's not bad to me, it's real. The world's not fair. Some of us work 10 times harder just to be a little bit better. And sometimes we don't get what we want. But I will say that the struggles I've had have helped me to relate to so many more people. And I feel like one of the things that people miss because they're so frustrated with My Hero Academia is that life sucks, but we have to learn how to embrace it and embrace themselves instead of just shaming ourselves for the things that we can't do or our shortcomings. And that's really a part of life and being mature and being healthy and happy. And funny enough, right before this vlog, I did reread the final chapter and I found a panel that basically summarizes what I just said. People are not born equal. We each take shape differently, which leads us to care about others. It's because one's mind and body aren't like anyone else's that we're drawn to others in the search for common ground. I, for one, am happy that I got to help contribute, build a Taekwondo team for my university, create a community, and experience all the things that came with that. And even if I'm not some world champion and I'm just some guy creating nerdy anime content, I'm still inspiring people. Martial arts and Taekwondo improved my life in so many ways and is why I am the person that I am today. It was a struggle for sure. Definitely experienced a lot of belittling, bullying, misunderstandings, because people just didn't know what was going on with me. It was definitely extremely frustrating knowing that I trained martial arts 3 to 4 times a week, then I lifted 3 to 7 times a week, and then I would even run 2 to 4 times a week. And just because I have some sort of condition, people would act like I didn't try hard enough, that I need to do more cardio, that I didn't train like everyone else, when really I was out training everyone for the most part. Again, in the same way that Deku had to put in all these extra hours just to be functional. But that also forced me to have a deeper understanding of myself and others, because I was forced to just figure out like why these things weren't working out. What does work out? How do I apply physiology and science and art to martial arts and make my own style and understanding? I think the last thing that clung to me with Deku's journey was that he got his own suit at the very end. And All Might stated that his body still jumps into action. I always found it interesting when mangaka or other authors explore the world where the main character who has this ability loses their ability, and how the experiences that they gain from the ability affects their body and their performance. Like when Ichigo lost his powers, he still had a durable body from all the things that he went through. Despite no longer having superhuman abilities, they're still superhuman. And it made me wonder how good of a hero Deku would be with that new suit. I wondered about that because I realized that after all these years of doing martial arts, especially as an adult, I'm never going to completely lose everything that I learned. You know when you see videos of masters who are obviously older and weaker than their like star students or whatever, and they can still take them down without trying or something like that? I'm not saying I'm on that level, but I definitely have experienced that myself. I took a year off, I took 2 years off from Taekwondo, and when I went back to spar, not too much changed. I had a little less stamina and flexibility, but I was still able to create power, I was still able to strategize, I was still able to see people coming and block them. And that's something that's pretty cool, knowing that like no matter what state my body is in, I can still defend myself, I can still do what needs to be done. And I was telling my coach that at a certain point, martial arts becomes a lot less physical and just mental. Of course, there's going to be some physical things that I can no longer do, but for the things that aren't limited by my physical body, I'll just always be able to do them because they're stored up here. So My Hero Academia used to be my favorite anime, but as I grew up and just experienced life a bit more, it did serve me a bit less, and I think part of it is because I started to read the manga. And when I read the manga of a show, I typically don't like watching it as much, so I kind of ruin that for myself. But I still have a special place in my heart for the show. Despite it not being my favorite, it is still going to be probably the #1 piece of media that I've ever experienced to see myself in a different way. And for that, My Hero Academia will always have my respect. And Deku, you will always be, don't say it, my hero.